Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The surface of Pandora stretched out in all its untamed beauty, a vibrant expanse of alien wilderness, untouched by human hands until now. Dr. Ethan Vale stood at the edge of the observation deck, peering out at the planet below. He marveled at the swirling greens and blues of the forests and rivers, the vast plains that stretched endlessly into the horizon. There was something serene, almost sacred, about Pandora. Its balance felt tangible, as though every breath the planet exhaled fed directly into the cycle of life. The glass beneath his palm felt cool, a stark contrast to the heat that rushed through his veins as anticipation built within him. After years of work, of simulations and prototypes, they had finally done it. The Neural Convergence Interface ANCI, as they called IT, was ready. And he, Dr. Ethan Vale, was the man who would pioneer the connection between human consciousness and Pandora's soul. Dr. Vale, came a voice from behind. They're ready for you in the lab. Ethan turned to see his colleague, Dr. Maria Reese, standing in the doorway. Her expression was a mix of awe and apprehension, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She understood, as well as he did, the magnitude of what they were about to do. They were about to cross a threshold no human had ever crossed before. But while Maria's face betrayed her anxiety, Ethan's heart only pounded with exhilaration. "I'll be right there," he said, flashing her a reassuring smile. As she disappeared down the corridor, Ethan took one last look at the planet. Soon, he wouldn't just be looking at Pandora from above, he would be part of it, immersed in its very essence. The lab was buzzing with activity when he arrived. Monitors hummed, scientists murmured as they made last-minute adjustments, and the NCI machine itself stood at the center of the room, towering over everything. Its sleek, metallic exterior gleamed under the fluorescent lights, while its query and intricate web of neural connectors pulsed faintly with energy. This was the gateway to the sea of consciousness. "Are you sure about this?" Maria asked as Ethan approached the machine. Her voice was low, her eyes scanning his face for any hint of doubt. Ethan smiled again, though this time it was softer, almost tender. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Maria's gaze lingered for a moment longer before she nodded. Stepping back to give him space, Ethan climbed into the machine, feeling the cool metal wrap around his limbs as the neural connectors locked into place around his head. The hum of the machinery grew louder, vibrating through his body. Beginning synchronization, came a voice over the intercom. Ethan took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and let the sensation wash over him. There was a brief moment of disorientation as the NCI took hold, pulling his consciousness into the system. And then, everything shifted. At first, there was nothing. Just an endless expanse of darkness, an emptiness that stretched on forever. But slowly, shapes began to form, a faint at first, like the outlines of dreams, but soon they solidified into something more tangible. He felt it before he saw it, the pulse of life, the rhythm of Pandora. It was as if the entire planet was breathing, and Ethan was caught in its exhale. The sea of consciousness unfolded before him, vast and incomprehensible. It wasn't water, not exactly, but it flowed like a river, shimmering with energy that radiated from every living thing on the planet. Trees, animals, even the very soil seemed to pulse with the same rhythm, all interconnected by this invisible force. Ethan felt himself drawn into it, his consciousness melding with the flow. He saw the forests, the rivers, the mountains, all from a perspective that was both his and not his at the same time. He could feel the lifeblood of the planet coursing through everything. The sensation was overwhelming, but in the most extraordinary way. There were no boundaries here, no limits. He wasn't just observing Pandora's ecosystem, he was part of it. Time lost all meaning as he drifted through the sea. He felt the warmth of the sun on his skin, even though he knew it wasn't real. He heard the wind rustling through the leaves of trees he'd never seen before, but he knew them now, in a way no one else ever could. He could feel the consciousness of the creatures around him, a collective hum of life that vibrated through his very core. And then, deeper still, he felt something else, a presence. It was subtle at first, like a whisper just beyond the edge of his awareness. But as he focused on it, the presence grew stronger, more defined. It wasn't a voice, not in the traditional sense, but it communicated nonetheless a vast, ancient intelligence, one that had existed long before humans ever set foot on Pandora. The soul of the planet. Ethan's heart raced. This was what they had been searching for, the consciousness of Pandora itself, the key to unlocking the mysteries of the planet's perfect balance. He could feel it now, a living, breathing entity that governed the flow of life across the entire planet. It wasn't sentient in the way humans understood sentience, but it was alive, and it was aware. He reached out with his mind, trying to make contact, to bridge the gap between human and planet. For a brief moment, he felt a connection, an understanding, a merging of thoughts. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. Ethan blinked, disoriented. The sea of consciousness swirled around him, but something felt off now. The rhythm, once so steady and harmonious, seemed disrupted. Subtle at first, like a faint ripple in still water, but the ripple grew larger, spreading out in all directions. He tried to focus, to center himself, but the disruption only intensified. The flow of energy around him began to warp, twisting and turning in ways that felt unnatural. He could feel the balance of the planet shifting, destabilizing. What's happening? He thought, panic rising in his chest. The answer came not from words, but from the very essence of the planet itself. The NCI, the connection between human consciousness and Pandora's soul system. It wasn't just tapping into the planet's energy, it was altering it. The presence he had felt before, the soul of Pandora, was reacting to the intrusion of his consciousness, and not in a good way. The ripple became a wave, a violent surge of energy that pushed back against him, trying to expel his presence from the sea. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had to sever the connection, had to pull himself out before it was too late. But the more he tried to disengage, the stronger the wave became, pulling him deeper into the chaos. He fought against it, struggling to regain control. The lab, the NCI, everything outside the sea of consciousness felt so distant now, like a dream he couldn't quite remember. All that mattered was the planet's pulse, and it was out of control. He felt himself being pushed to the edge of the sea, his consciousness on the verge of being expelled. But just as he thought he would be torn away completely, something shifted. The wave of energy slowed, softened, and then, for a brief moment, everything was still. Ethan hung there, suspended in the void, waiting. He didn't know what had just happened, but he could feel the presence of Pandora's soul once again, watching, waiting. It hadn't rejected him entirely, at least, not yet. But he knew then, with a clarity that cut through the haze, that the NCI was dangerous. The technology, as revolutionary as it was disrupting the very fabric of Pandora's ecosystem. If they continued, if they pushed further, they could destroy the planet's balance completely. And it would be his fault. Ethan's heart raced as the realization hit him. They were playing with fire. Pandora was far more complex than they had imagined. The sea of consciousness was not just a passive network waiting to be tapped. It was alive, reactive, and deeply intertwined with every living being on the planet. What they had seen as a technological triumph was, in fact, a ticking time bomb. The more they intruded, the more they risked collapsing the natural balance that had sustained Pandora for eons. But as much as he knew what needed to be done, disengaging wasn't an option anymore. Not right now. His mind remained intertwined with Pandora's consciousness, tethered by the NCI. Any attempt to disconnect could cause catastrophic feedback. It was like trying to pull a thread from a tightly woven fabric. One wrong move, and the entire system could unravel. He forced himself to breathe deeply, studying his thoughts. He needed to think clearly, to assess the situation from within the sea of consciousness and find a way to fix this. The presence of Pandora's soul lingered, watching him. It was more than an awareness, it was as if the planet was trying to communicate with him, trying to warn him. He focused on that feeling, reaching out again with his mind. This time, instead of probing for answers, he opened himself up to Pandora, allowing its energy to flow through him freely. The sensation was overwhelming, like standing in the middle of a raging storm. Yet, at the core of it, there was a profound calm, a delicate equilibrium. He began to understand. Pandora's soul wasn't just an energy field, it was a symbiotic entity, an intricate balance of life and consciousness that operated on its own terms. It wasn't meant to be controlled or manipulated by outside forces. The more they tried, the more it would resist. And then he saw the damage they had already caused. The sea of consciousness revealed itself in layers, an intricate web connecting every species, every ecosystem, every river and tree on the planet. But there were fractures now, small but growing. The NCI had introduced instability, disrupting the flow of energy between Pandora's core systems. If they didn't stop, those fractures would widen, spreading like a disease across the planet, until the balance collapsed entirely. He had to act. But how? Ethan's mind raced. There was no time to go back to the lab, no time to debate with the others. He had to find a way to stabilize the connection from within. If he could reinforce the natural energy pathways and withdraw the NCI's influence, perhaps Pandora could heal itself. He focused on the presence of Pandora's soul once more, feeling the pulse of its energy. He let his consciousness sink deeper into the flow, aligning himself with the rhythm of the planet. It was like tuning a finely calibrated instrument, a delicate, precise. Slowly, carefully, he began to pull back the artificial tendrils of the NCI, unraveling the human-made threads that had embedded themselves into Pandora's system. The planet pushed back at first, resisting the interference. But Ethan persisted, moving cautiously, guiding the flow of energy back into its natural pathways. The fractures in the sea began to close, the ripples smoothing out. It was working. But just as he felt the balance beginning to restore itself, a sudden jolt of pain shot through his mind. The NCI flared, sending a shockwave of feedback through his neural link. He gasped, the connection faltering. He could feel the system fighting against him, the technology trying to assert itself once more. His body tensed in the machine, muscles seizing as the strain of maintaining the connection weighed on him. He couldn't keep this up much longer. He was caught in a tug-of-war between Pandora and the NCI. His consciousness stretched to the breaking point. But he couldn't give up. Not now. With every ounce of strength he had left, Ethan focused his mind, pushing against the NCI's influence. He had to sever the connection, fully this time, before it was too late. His thoughts blurred, pain radiating through his skull, but he refused to let go. If he stopped now, Pandora's balance would collapse, and it would be his fault. Finally, with one last push, he felt the neural link snap. The connection severed. Ethan's consciousness recoiled, pulled back into his own mind with such force that it left him gasping for air. His body slumped in the NCI machine, muscles trembling as he struggled to regain his bearings. He was back in the lab. The lights were dim, and the hum of the machinery around him sounded distant, muffled. His vision swam, the edges of his awareness still hazy from the ordeal. But he was here. He had made it back. Ethan. Maria's voice pierced through the fog, her face coming into focus as she rushed to his side. Ethan, can you hear me? He nodded weakly, trying to sit up. His limbs felt heavy, as though they were made of lead. But he managed to pull himself upright, the weight of his body slowly easing as the effects of the NCI faded. What happened? He rasped, his throat dry. Maria glanced nervously at the monitors, her face pale. We lost you for a minute. The system went haywire. There was a massive energy spike. We had to cut the feed manually. Ethan's heart sank. The NCI, it's unstable, Maria said, shaking her head. Whatever happened in there, the system couldn't handle it. Ethan closed his eyes, the memory of the sea of consciousness still fresh in his mind. He had saved Pandora for now, but the damage had already been done. The NCI was too dangerous, too invasive. If they continued using it, Pandora's balance would collapse, and the planet's ecosystem would be destroyed. "We can't go back in," he said quietly. "Not ever." Maria's eyes widened. "Ethan, what are you talking about? We've barely scratched the surface. Do you realize what this technology could mean for humanity, for science?" "I do," he replied, his voice strained. "But it's too dangerous. The NCI is disrupting Pandora's natural balance. If we keep using it, we'll destroy the planet." Maria stared at him, disbelief flickering across her face. "You're serious?" Ethan nodded. "Pandora isn't just a resource. It's a living system, and we're tearing it apart." Silence hung between them as Maria processed his words. She glanced at the NCI, then back at him, her expression conflicted. "What do we do?" Ethan leaned back in the chair, exhaustion pulling at his every fiber. "We shut it down. For good." Maria hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. She reached for the console, her fingers hovering over the controls. "Are you sure?" He met her gaze, his resolve firm. "I'm sure." With a deep breath, Maria pressed the button, and the NCI powered down. The hum of the machine faded into silence, the lights dimming as the system shut off. Ethan felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. It was over. But as the lab fell quiet, a new weight settled on his shoulders. The NCI had been his life's work, years of research, development, and hope, all aimed at unlocking the mysteries of Pandora. And now, it was gone. He had sacrificed everything to protect the planet, but at what cost? He closed his eyes, letting the silence envelop him. His mind wandered back to the sea of consciousness, to the presence he had felt through the soul of Pandora, vast and unknowable. He had glimpsed something extraordinary, something beyond human comprehension. But in the end, he had chosen to let it go, because some things were more important than progress. As the weight of exhaustion finally pulled him under, Ethan knew he had made the right choice. Pandora's balance had been restored, and the planet would continue to thrive. It would remain untouched by human hands, its mysteries preserved for future generations to wonder about, but never to disturb. And perhaps, in the end, that was how it should be.